Yo guys, what is going on? JPS back in another video, and today we're going to be reacting to 5 ways British and American train travel is very different. Now I've ridden both American and British trains. Our entire trip when we were in Britain was we were transported by the trains. We had the BritRail pass, so every day we were riding on trains. We also rode on the tube in London, and I've ridden on the subway in the United States. I've ridden on trains in between cities. Although we'll get into that a bit later in this video on the differences between public transportation and trains in the United States and Britain. I'm sure he's going to touch on that as well. This is Lost in the Pond. Make sure you guys go subscribe to him. He makes amazing content. Love this guy's YouTube channel. But yeah, let's get right into this. This should be a really interesting video. Make sure you guys smash the like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's do it.
Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to trains. Trains are a fabulous way of getting around, especially if you're the sort of person that likes looking at quickly moving trees. And as somebody with fairly extensive experience of train travel in both Britain and America, I'm here to tell you, as I often am, that both countries throw up many differences. And this is particularly true on train services that span the entire country as opposed to trains that serve a specific city. And it's each country's national passenger trains that I'll be focusing on today. Now, you've probably heard me mention before that one of the things that I miss the most about living in the United Kingdom is the comprehensive train system that can get you from and to most major towns and cities in the country. For instance, that's how I'd usually return home from Lancaster University on the west coast of England to my hometown of Grimsby on the east coast. And I wasn't alone. It's not entirely unusual for train services of this nature to be completely packed. But all up and down Britain, particularly England, there's quite a cluster of rail lines that are dedicated to passenger travel. And in total, if you were to add all of this up, it comes to about 10,000 miles of rail line. So how does this compare to the United States? Well, the total mileage of train track in the US is about 140,000 miles. However, most of that is for freight trains. And, you know, unless you are Indiana Jones, you're not going to be riding that as a passenger. Instead, the tracks that are used by Amtrak, many of which in fact are owned by the freight lines, come to about 21,000 miles.
Just take a look at this, guys. Take a look at this. Do you see how terrible that is? Terrible. It's crazy.
In fact are owned by the freight lines, come to about 21,000 miles. And you might be thinking, ooh, Lawrence, that's twice the amount of Britain. We win, go America. But then you have to consider the fact that the United States is about 40 times larger than the UK. So what's going on there? Well, of course, because of the immense size of the United States, there are many places in the middle of the country where not many people live. So the financial justification for a multi-tiered network of train lines just isn't there. Furthermore, if you want to get from, say, here in Chicago to Seattle, it's just much quicker to fly. And speaking of speed, the other really major difference between the train services in both countries is just how fast or how slow they go. Now, it's worth saying that neither country offers the kind of speed that you will find in some European countries as well as Southeast Asia, but the pace of Amtrak almost makes British trains look like interstellar space travel. In the past year, I've ridden on both Amtrak and the Trans-Pennine Express from Manchester to Grimsby, and there's definitely a notable difference. And that makes sense because in the UK, most trains get up to 125 miles per hour. In the US, most services run at less than 110 miles per hour. And sometimes way less than that, especially since the freight companies own most of the tracks. Amtrak trains often have to come to a standstill just to let the freight trains go past. Moreover, the United States really only boasts one high-speed rail service in the entire country, and that's the Acela line on the East Coast. And that's because that service is a central hub of major cities like DC, Philadelphia, and New York City. And sure enough, it does go faster than most of the trains in the United Kingdom. And I say most because we also have an exception, and that exception is the Eurostar. This is the train that takes you from London to Paris, and it can get up to speeds of 186 miles per hour. Now, it's one thing having faster trains, but how many people actually use them? Anecdotally, before I look this up, I would say substantially more people use the train in Britain than they do in the US. One reason I say that,
I would 100% agree with that, just based on what I saw. I have a lot to add to this.
Any time I ever rode a British train, it always seemed like it was packed to the rafters. Do trains have rafters? They do now. If you're wondering why I have this entire carriage to myself, it's because that week my wife and I got a deal on a first class ticket and nobody else seemed to do the same. So thank you to my patrons for helping to fund that so that we could capture this B-roll. If you would like to become a patron of Lost in the Pond, you can do so today at patreon.com.
Hey, whoa. If you want to become a patron of ItsJps, you can do so today too. Link in the description.
Same is often true with American trains. So what is the data on this? Well, if we were to look at the years prior to the pandemic, the number of passengers that you would see on an annual basis in the United States is roughly 30 million. Whereas in the UK, that number is a staggering 1.7 billion. So
I was right. See, it wasn't just an anecdote. I knew it, bro. Yeah, that's what only thing would have made sense.
Well, a large reason is population density. Britain simply has way more people per square mile than the United States. So this means that in Britain, there's just a greater demand for people to get from one point of the country to the other. The other is automobiles. I mean, the United States has such a vast and comprehensive interstate highway system that trains, behind also planes, are far down in the pecking order. And because of this, there's also a massive difference between how frequently trains run in America versus Britain. Take, for example, the 4 to 7 hour train journey between Chicago and Indianapolis. If for whatever reason you're running late and you happen to miss the train, it's no problem, just wait and catch another one the next day. That wasn't genuine advice because I don't know how refunds work for that. But in Britain, owing to the greater demand, train services run multiple times a day. Not only that, they're always packed. But in 2022, if the same thing happened in the United States, where trains were running from Chicago to Indianapolis several times a day, there'd be a lot of empty seats. People would sooner drive because it's just so much quicker, although you do have to take I-65. So because of the relative limitations of American train travel, does this mean that it's cheaper to travel by Amtrak than it is by the trains in the UK? And the answer to that is an absolutely resounding sort of. You see, it's quite hard to make a comparison because ticket prices fluctuate on either side of the pond. But in the United States, I'd say you get a bigger bang for your buck if we're talking about the amount you pay per mile of track that you travel. And this might not be surprising to my British viewers. After all, it is famously expensive to travel on British trains. And some might take the view of, oh, Lawrence, isn't that just British people moaning again?
Emphasis on the British people, because if you're not a British citizen, let me tell you, it's a great deal. Like, it's an amazing deal. So, but yeah, I actually am curious. I'm gonna ask y'all because what do you guys? But you're not gonna have the same pass as me. What is an 8-day pass, consecutive pass, for a British citizen? How much would that cost? I'm curious.
Expensive
Britrail,
to travel
entire
British
train network.
And
everything.
some might take the view of, oh, Lawrence, isn't that just British people moaning again? Well, no. Apparently, according to a study, the average cost of a UK train ticket is about 30% more expensive than other European countries. Let's say you buy a single ticket from London to Edinburgh. At the speeds that train goes at, the journey time is about 4.5 hours. And just looking on the National Rail site this morning, you could be expected to pay for that single ticket between $100 and $200 US. Oof. Could be even higher than that on other days. It's hard to say. Now let's look at a single ticket for Chicago to Seattle, which takes, and I'm not making this up, 46 hours. So almost 2 entire days on a train. But here's the plot twist. According to Amtrak's website, $150 to $250. But you are on the train for 10 times as long.
Who's going to do that?
More of their service.
Everyone's just going to fly.
When it comes to this, you'd rather get from Chicago to Seattle much faster, hence the price disparity. But now that I've cut through the data, what's it actually like to ride on these passenger trains? And honestly, despite its limitations, I quite like riding on Amtrak. It's comfortable, decent, if pricey catering service, internet access, outrageous views of the American landscape. And I think you can more or less take everything I just said and apply it to Britain. The only major difference that I can think of, other than the ones that I pointed out in this video, is, and this is anecdotal, I think you're more likely to get a table seat on British trains than you are on track. But I don't have any data to back that up, just experience. And that's British versus American train travel in a nutshell. When I first moved to the US, I had no idea that its train network wasn't as comprehensive or as fast as the United Kingdom.
Really?
And I've only gotten used to that idea by understanding why and accepting Amtrak for the beautiful, leisurely thing that it is. I'm Lawrence Brown.
That's interesting. I'm shocked that he thought we would have trains like that. So I was actually just thinking right now, And the truth is, I have hardly even used American trains. I said I've been on some, I've been on the metro, the subway a couple times in big cities, but a train between two cities is just almost unheard of. It takes like 3 days to drive from one coast to the next coast. Just the price of the ticket, even if it's like $400, the flight can be $400 or under $400. So it's cheaper to fly between cities than to take the train in some instances. Another thing is there's just not that many trains between cities. Like, it just doesn't happen. And, he says that's because there's not much demand, and that because, there's very rural towns with not that many people. So it wouldn't make sense economically to have trains that would network the entire United States and rural America. I think that's definitely a big factor in it, but I think a lot of it has to do with the culture in the United States. It's very hard to describe the American culture. It's hard to put it into words because it's something you're just constantly surrounded by and always experiencing, but you never quite like think of it that way. It's just how it is. But I feel like Americans want to be independent. They want to be able to leave it whenever they want. They want to be able to go wherever they want. You know what I mean? So having like your first car, it's like a thing in the United States. It's getting your first car. It happened to me earlier this year. I got my first car, and that's just how it is. Like, it's just normal to have your own car for the entirety of your life. That's how it is. I'm not saying everyone has that. I'm not saying that's the standard for all Americans, because obviously there's people who, don't have the money for that and have to use public transportation their whole life. But that is like the American thing. You know what I mean? So trains just aren't the thing. However, what do I prefer? I think the trains were really nice in Britain. A lot of people complain about, the delays, and there were delays and things like that. But I think that's something because people get used to it, so they're more likely to criticize things. I do the same thing with services that I take for granted all the time. But as a foreigner visiting and using the trains every day, I felt like they were spectacular. We could visit super small towns. Almost every town had a train station in it. The times were almost always correct. Really good seats, clean cabins. I had a lot of tables. There were a lot of times where we had seats at tables, so I could do some, data backup while we were going to the next place, while we were on the trip. So next time we're in Britain, definitely going to be buying the rail pass again. Spectacular deal, and I just love how it networked the entire country. You could literally go anywhere using the trains. There's definitely benefits to having cars, and obviously we subsidize cars a lot more in the United States with our incredibly low fuel prices, which I had taken for granted. When they went over $3 or $4, I was complaining and like, oh, this. But then when I think about what you guys have to pay per gallon or per liter, it's just tiny in comparison. Anyways, guys, that was a really interesting video. Let me know what you thought of that. And if anyone knows what the average train ticket price is, please let me know. I'll have to look back and see what I paid for the 8-day consecutive Brit Rail Pass, but if someone would let me know what they paid, we could compare, and I'd be curious to see what type of benefits and advantages they offer to foreign travelers. With that being said, guys, that was quite a mouthful. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, consider joining the Patreon. He plugged his, so I'm plugging mine. We do movie and show reactions over there, so if you're interested, first link in the description. But with that being said, I'm going to catch you all in the next video. Peace.